Welcome to Between the Lines, a podcast hosted by former world number one Laura Massaro and performance coach Ahad Reza.
We break down what's really happening in high-level squash across the technical, tactical, physical and mental realms and help you translate it into action.
You'll hear match analysis, guided insights, coaching demonstrations and conversations with some of the best minds in sport.
But this isn't just about the theory. It's about growing a community of curious players and coaches dedicated to unlocking their potential together.
So if you're ready to train smarter, think deeper, and play better, join us Between the Lines. Hey everyone, quick interruption. If you've ever felt stuck in your squash, you're training hard but not improving fast enough, Laura and I built something just for you.
Our new online coaching community gives you the structure, clarity, and live access to us every month so you can finally break past plateaus without paying private coaching fees.
If that sounds like what you need, just email me at ahad@arperformance.com and I'll help you get started. Now, back to the program. Folks, Laura and I just finished a fantastic podcast with her old nutritionist, Dr. Rosimus. And for me, one of the big things was understanding that there's a purpose behind your fueling. Now, Chris talks about a ton of stuff, but the key was understanding what it is you're trying to fuel for. Are you fueling for recovery, for performance, for weight loss, weight gain, et cetera, et cetera? But that was a fundamental piece for me that was critical. Laura, what about you?
Yeah, I agree. It was such an in-depth chat around nutrition. And I think overall, it just adds a huge amount of clarity for people out there that are wanting to learn a little bit more about performance nutrition, protein, carbohydrates, timings, how much carbohydrate is in certain foods and when to best eat it. We touch upon everything from eating for teenagers and stiffness. It was a brilliant podcast, so I think everyone's going to learn an absolute ton from it. So I look forward to hearing what you think.
Let's get into it.
Welcome back to Between the Lines. Today we're joined by an expert whose work happens behind the scenes but has a massive impact on elite performance, Dr. Rosimus. Chris's resume is extensive, currently working with elite football and has previously worked with football teams including Nottingham Forest and then Leicester City during their unforgettable Premier League title run. Other sports on his CV include cricket with the ECB and cycling. However, it was squash where our paths first crossed. Before his current role in football, Chris spent nearly 6 years at the English Institute of Sport, the EIS. And from there, we worked together privately during my journey to world number one back in 2016. And I can honestly say his guidance on nutrition was a game changer, helping me make the small but really crucial gains needed to reach the very top. He's one of the best in the business when it comes to performance nutrition, and today we are diving into what fuels the very best athletes in the world. So let's get into it. Chris, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks a lot for that amazing intro, and thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here. I can't believe it's 2016 when we worked together. That was crazy how time has passed.
I know, you're absolutely right. I was actually quite shocked because I thought, strangely enough, it was actually earlier.
Oh, really?
Because I retired in 2019. So it was that 2015-2016 run to world number one. And we can dive into all the details of bod pods and DEXA scans and the lot.
Counting carbohydrates and all sorts. It was brilliant piece of work that I'm looking forward to reliving it. I was actually reviewing some of our files and plans and stuff, and it was great to look back on.
Brilliant. Well, let's get into it. Tell us how you ended up in nutrition, and tell us what the journey's been like to get into where you are now, working with elite football.
Well, I'll say my life story, but it's been quite an unconventional, journey. So I'll give you the condensed short version for the purpose of the podcast. I don't want to bore too many people, but I've had two careers, really. You might not know this, Laura, but before I got into nutrition, I worked in industry for 6 years, installing CCTV systems, can you believe, and fire alarms and stuff like that. So I left school, really, just went straight into work. I didn't really have any eye on higher education at that stage. So it was during my time in that role, where I was always involved in football as a player, and in my local community, I got involved in coaching kids in the local community, and then through that, I did my coaching badges, and it was during one of my level 2 coaching badges, there was an element around nutrition that really sparked some interest in me. So then I started eating better to be better at football. I started feeling the benefits firsthand, and then I started to talk to the kids that I was coaching about, basic nutrition, like what a good breakfast looks like, just trying to give them knowledge. And then it just really sparked a passion and interest for the sports nutrition side of things. So then I made it my goal that I wanted to work in sports nutrition. So I had to kind of retrain again academically. So I went to university at 23 and I had to kind of start again and did an access course at Manchester Metropolitan University, and then got through that. And it went from there really. My contacts in football, I was coaching with Manchester United soccer schools in Oldham Athletics Centre of Excellence Youth Programme. And because I was in those environments, I was creating dual role for myself as a football coach and nutritionist to build experiences. And it snowballed from there, really. It just kept, opportunity after opportunity just kept finding for myself. Spent time in America at IMG Academies as an internship, building my kind of CV. And then to cut a long story short, once I graduated, my role with Manchester United took me to the Middle East to run a soccer school and a nutrition module out there for a year. And it's while I was there, I kind of applied and found myself into the EIS looking after the England cricket team. So, yeah, kind of 15 years later, I've had quite diverse experiences in club football, and now I'm at international football. It's been quite a journey.
Wow, that's Chris, that's phenomenal. I feel like we're all in for a treat today. You do have to begin just for fun. What were some things Laura was really messing up when you were working up with her? What did you have to fix right off the bat?
That's a hard one. I wouldn't want to. We're going back some time. I wouldn't say you have to fit. Laura's easy to work with and challenging in the fact that you had fixed idea. I remember our first meeting at Man Met, if you remember, you came into the lab, and I remember just Laura had very fixed ideas and very focused around nutrition. And I remember walking away thinking, really, really kind of motivated, but could I kind of break some of the not beliefs and routines that I guess Laura held true. I guess that was the biggest challenge. But I always remember always turning up with nice green smoothies and this, that, the other. It's how can I kind of work with that the motivation Laura already had and try and influence her. I guess that was a bigger challenge.
Interesting, interesting. We will have to dive into the efficacy of green smoothies because there's so many different trends and fads that we always kind of hear about. But let's maybe start off at a very basic level. In the sport of squash, or even generally, just for performance, what are some high level recommendations you would share? Let's take squash specifically. Obviously, carbs, proteins, fats, timing. What would you recommend?
Well, I guess I'd look at it maybe slightly differently now, kind of 10 years later. But it all starts with if I'm working with any athlete, and this is what I think that we did really well, Laura. Look at the demands of the sport and the demands of what you're actually doing. I think that's the first thing. So, and once you kind of unless you don't know what the demands are and what the kind of baseline of that, it's hard to advise what a recommendation. So, first thing, it's understand the demands of the sport, and it's not just it's the sport; it's the training schedule that goes around it. Is it an indoor sport versus an outdoor sport? I remember in squash, for example, when we did biomarkers looking at blood and stuff like that, vitamin D was generally quite low because most of the time I spent indoors. So it's trying to understand the sport, the culture of the sport, the travel demands, the demands of a game versus training. And then what you'll find is that every meal and every piece of advice isn't equal because there's a different demand for a different phase of the week or training block that an individual's in. So the first thing is it's understanding the demands and then periodizing the nutrition from that. And I think and I reflect on our work together actually. And I think that was some of the the most detailed work that I'd done actually at that time with an athlete. It's literally to the point of looking at energy demands. We didn't use GPS; it wasn't really relevant. But heart rate monitors. I remember the watch, the Polar watch, used to wear, and then we'd just look at carbohydrate and just go to the gram and kind of set parameters based on each meal proximal to training and recovery. And that was the foundation. And from that, it's quite easy, really. I think once you know that, it's quite easy to make the recommendation because you know what you're trying to fuel. And whatever sport it is, you're either fueling for something or recovering for something. So, and then it's carbohydrate, proteins, the main macronutrient you're looking at. And then it's just the ratios and when you kind of dial them up and dial them down. And then you look into recovery and then you start to look at anti-inflammatory, antioxidants and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I'm very intrigued now. When it comes to kind of measuring some of these things, like you said, you were looking at the heart rate monitor. Were you using other sort of metabolic testing to figure out whether Laura is primarily in an aerobic zone or an anaerobic zone, and then figuring out from there kind of what her fuel source should be, or how are you sort of figuring those things out?
If I recall rightly, it was based on the heart rate data, and then it was just to see. Yeah, I mean, once your heart rate gets elevated to a certain level, you have a switch from using fat as a fuel or carbohydrate as a fuel. And I guess when you switch to burning primarily kind of oxidizing carbohydrate into glucose, then that's what you need to feed the body because that's what it wants. If it's working really hard, think of the muscle that's working really, really, really hard. It wants that continuous glucose to help the muscle work and fuel everything. So it's understanding that, and we did a lot of work with Mark Campbell at the time, the Laura's S&C, and that was absolutely integral to this plan working well. Actually, understanding like the load and what kind of the training stimulus it was that Laura was being exposed to, and then the heart rate was able to you're able to look at that and think, okay, what sort of fuel is needed at this time? Is it a more moderate carbohydrate, low glycemic index, more of a fat-based high protein diet? So that does help for sure. And then other areas where you can measure. I mean, you can measure lots of things, but I think the challenge is understanding what's meaningful, what's worth measuring, and what's valid. I'm very, very simple in my approach. So things like biomarkers around blood. We worked a lot on bone health. Laura, for me, like looking at bone health, a no-brainer. For squash playing, straight away, I thought working indoors, sun exposure, good robust bone. So what's the vitamin D status like? So look at that straight away. And then it's measuring. We measured a lot around carbohydrate, and that was the biggest thing. If we're trying to really influence things, let's understand what's going in and what you need, really.
Yeah. I mean, it's all bringing back a lot of memories. I feel like you're even remembering it better than I am, but it's all coming back to me. We were just going back. I think for anyone listening out there, I think the number one thing probably with what we're talking about, which is really interesting, was we used at the time MyFitnessPal, I think it was, where I would basically, and this is obviously maybe we're looking at more a professional squash player or any professional athlete, you're looking at measuring out your food so you can be really calculated with how much fat, protein and carbohydrate are going in. And then I would upload my Polar data, my watch, my heart rates to that app, and Chris would just, when it suited, have a look, make sure that we're in the right phase of certain nutrition phases and what we were up to. And that's when Mark linked in with phases of training as well. But I think the one thing that you educated me about, and I know even from where we started in 2016, nutrition has probably even moved on. At the time, it was quite niche. And, I was talking to Danny about it. He was saying, when I think back to that working with Chris, it was almost like psychology. It was fairly new when it came to that, people working and really understanding it. Now there's all sorts going on, which we can get into later. But your biggest education, I felt, to me was supplementing my training as well as I could do with various different supplements, but also understanding that each calorie was not made equal. And I think when you say about that change in mindset, I probably came to you with the very basic understanding of what I'd done before was calorie counting effectively. I've tried to lean down before by basically just getting myself into a calorie deficit. And I had no clue really at the time that if I ate a calorie in protein, it was very different to a calorie in carbohydrate and how that affected the body. So maybe you could with your extensive knowledge, explain that?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely did. So we did, first off, how we cycled the carbohydrate first and foremost. So we wanted to try and get you leaner, if you remember, because we
Yeah.
thought efficiency around the court. I remember we did testing with Keith, and we looked at that specific test around the court and measured that.
Yeah.
We looked at that and thought, right, speed, endurance, and efficiency around the court is important. So how do we improve that? So weight to kind of body weight to mass ratio. If you improve that functional someone's masses, i.e., more muscle mass, less fat mass, then there's a benefit to that. But then how you get there and achieve that, like Laura said, there's a couple of ways of doing it. There's just going quite hard and high energy deficit, which will achieve an outcome, but will it make you the most efficient in terms of fueling and recovering? And then can you do it more detailed, where you're still in a relatively low energy deficit, but you're making sure you're not compromising the fueling and recovery needs of the athlete. And that's, I think, where we had our biggest gains. So we looked at certain sessions, and it was a case of like some would need higher carbohydrate, some would need lower. And when you talk about the difference between protein and carbohydrate, they've both got the same amount of energy per unit, but how they're broken down and metabolized is completely different. So the calories in protein are equal to the calories in carbohydrate, for example, but it's how it impacts insulin, impacts blood sugar, how they're broken down, how they're stored. They all give in energy at some level, but the rate in which they're broken down, metabolized, and used by the body, particularly during exercise, are completely different. So that's where the difference is. And then if you are in a deficit as well, but you're not trying, you've got to reduce, say, carbohydrate, then you've got to try and kind of backfill with something else. So that's where you start look at fats, for example. So there's like nine calories per gram of fats, which is significantly more, I guess, than carbohydrates and proteins. But you look at the right fats, avocado, salmons, good quality fats. You can get the calories up to a level that's going to keep the athlete healthy, and but you're still achieving what you want to achieve.
Hmm. And Chris, in different phases, like if you're thinking more recovery versus you're in the middle of a really intense training block where you have a lot of high intensity sessions, would you prioritize the carbohydrates more during the high intensity sessions because it's more of like an anaerobic glycolysis sort of system use versus maybe a little bit more proteins kind of after sessions if you're doing a lot of strength lifting? Like how would you, I guess, correlate strength training to the macros versus, say, aerobic endurance versus anaerobic endurance?
Yeah, I mean, look at the duration as well of how long you're going to be doing these kind of things. So the longer period of time you'll be performing something aerobically, for example, then or anaerobically, then at some point, then carbohydrate will be the primary fuel that you're going to need to make sure you don't become depleted. And that depends how long you're performing for. Anything over an hour, then and you're going to be looking at carbohydrate for sure. But if you're going doing gym sessions, gym's very anaerobic, isn't it, in what you're doing? Your ATP is constantly being used, constantly regenerating, and it does need a fuel source for that. So I think going in, the way I recommend training, the way I would train myself, so you don't go into the gym with no fuel, or you certainly need a amount of carbohydrate, but the amount of carbohydrate might be lower. So if I was fueling Laura's a really important squash match, that pre-feed might be something around 80 to 100 grams carbohydrate. That might not be as much for the gym. You might be looking at maybe 40 to 50 grams in the hour before, which is enough to fuel. It was what they say. It's fuel for the work required. That's what you start to look at, and then the fuel source might be slightly. You might change the fuel source if it's if you're fueling in that acute window before you go and perform. You want something that's very easy to digest, that's going to get absorbed into the muscle and be functional quite quickly. Whereas if there's a period of time before you need that fuel, then you want it to release quite slower. So you have a mixed protein, moderate glycemic index meal where you're still going to get the fuel, but it's going to be released over a slower period of time. So it all comes down to proximal to what you're going to be doing. It's what you choose to eat is driven by that, and what the timing that you eat it is driven by that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I I'm like reliving some when you start talking about those grams. I'm like, oh no, those days where you were like, go for it, Laura. 200 grams of carbohydrate. You're all in. You're working
Yeah.
hard, and then I remember one day. I remember one weekend. It was a rest day, and you were like, you got to keep you. Something ridiculous. Tell me if I'm wrong. Well, it felt ridiculous. Felt like you were saying you got to keep your carbohydrate below, say, like 50 grams for the day. And I started looking on my fitness, the my fitness pal, and I'm going, it's 20 grams for an apple. What am I supposed to eat? And I'm
Yeah.
like thinking about you're going, well, you've got tinned fish, you've got yogurt, you've got this, and I'm like, oh. And I was just interested. I mean, maybe people, obviously no, I guess no one's going to really have been aware of these sort of numbers before, thinking maybe about, okay, well, I'm going to do a hard session in the gym. You probably need, like you said, 70, 80 grams. If you're thinking I need that for a gym session, is that a good bowl of porridge, would you say, kind of that 80 grams?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, generally, the way I look at it, a slice of bread, it all comes down to the size and volume. So this is very, very general what I'm going to say now, but
Yeah.
generally, like a slice of bread is anywhere between 10, 15 grams of carbohydrate, whereas a bagel, for example, can be 40 to 50 grams. So might look similar, but quite different. Put some jam on that, and that's an extra 10, getting to 50, 60. Bowl of porridge, based on the size. If it's made with milk, don't forget there's still carbohydrate in the milk. That's anywhere between 50 to 100. So yeah, it's hard to say, but generally speaking, yeah, that's the kind
Yeah.
that's what they kind of hold. That's the value that they hold.
Yeah. No, it's helpful. And I think when we were in those real measurement days, the best bits that I remember were the ones where you were like, it was beginning of summer training. And I think this would be interesting for people when they just think about phases of the season, let's say. And I'm assuming this is the same for all sports, but you are in, that summer phase, you maybe got 8 to 10, 12 weeks of summer training, and you're just basically like, work as hard as you can in the gym. Let's build this muscle so you can eat, basically kind of go for it on the carbs, go for it on the protein, hit these markers. Don't worry too much, basically. I loved that phase.
Well,
And
that's
then
the difference. Sorry, yeah, go on.
and then all of a sudden we'd start to hit kind of like that middle phase of the training where we're doing the bod pod scans, which we can go into exactly what they were, the DEXA scans. We're measuring body fat week in, getting those bloody caliper things out, measuring my fat.
Yeah.
And then you basically start like, right, you're looking great. Your body fat's like not dropped at all, really. You're the same as you were, say, 6 weeks ago, but your muscle has improved, your muscle has increased. So now we have to go about finding a way to keep that muscle, and we have to lean down. And that's where those really low carbohydrate days came in. So you build in you're keeping that muscle mass. Is that right, would you say?
Exactly. That you've described it perfectly. I mean, that's the cycle of a I guess an athlete's life. You're either off season resting, off season adapting and training or performing. So then the fuel needs have to change to that. So I think some people can often try to eat the same food all the time, despite what they're doing, and they never change. And that's where, like we said, it's responsible then to advise you, if you're going to train really hard, you need to eat more, and it's actually fine to eat more. And if you're eating a little bit more than you normally would, and you may be an energy you're overeating, it's actually going to help your muscle grow. You're trying to create an environment for your muscle and your body to really recover, and it just needs nutrients, and it's the right nutrients. And then it's like you say, that's where we looked at the days to think, right, you've built this muscle mass, we've got to hold it, because that's what's going to give you that performance. That's made you really functional, and so to make you really efficient, we've got to hold that. And then what can we get rid of? And that was when they started to periodize the carbohydrates over time.
Yeah.
And then
The
the
not
reason
so fun bit.
yeah, the reason it was fun for me as a nutritionist, I guess, but and the reason we measured it is because you need a baseline to reference to know, are we on the right track?
Yeah.
Otherwise it becomes guesswork, and I like certainty. If I'm asking you to do something that's challenging, it's also, you need to see the value and the reward. So a baseline measure of body composition. There's different ways of doing it. Skin fold calipers, which are good, but they just give you a measure of the kind of subcutaneous fat in the skin. It's just a measure of fat around the skin. And then you've got, so that's one good measure, which is it's repeatable and it's practical. But if you want to know a bit more about body composition as a whole. And what I'm interested in mainly is the distribution and the ratio of fat mass and fat-free mass, or muscle mass and fat mass. That's where you need a more detailed measure. So the two measures that we use at the university I was involved with, we had a bod pod and a DEXA scanner. So a bod pod, if you don't know, it's got air displacement kind of method. You sit in a pod like an airlocked pod. I don't know the exact algorithms that go inside it, but it's able to kind of displace and kind of partition fat mass versus fat-free mass. So we use that as a regular measure. But the gold standard, which we had access to, was a DEXA scanner, which is able to essentially is an X-ray of all Laura's body, and from that we can get a highly accurate measure of, again, fat mass, fat-free mass, and even bone density as well. So when we were looking at bone health and stuff, we could see the kind of the overall picture, and that's you can use that to guide you, and then that gives me confidence there when we're on the right track. Laura's not at risk of injury. She's not at risk of getting ill because of underfueling her, for example. So that helped over time.
Just you described the bod pod there, which was we would go into that, but I would go into that bod pod every 6 weeks or so, probably, wouldn't I guess. Yeah. You described it well, I would say, but just for anyone who needs a visual, this is me in basically a bikini of some sort, in a swim hat to cover my hair, and in an egg-shaped pod that's basically, I'm getting inside a giant egg, basically. Yeah. And then shut the door like a spaceship. There's a small window, for emergencies. and then I sit in there and he goes, "You ready?" And I'm like, sat super still. And then basically it then feels like you're about to take off because all of your ears pop with the air displacement. So I feel like you left out the best bits there for people.
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, I never went in the bod pod, so I didn't have that same experience. I just kind of...
Well, that's a disgrace.
Well, you're in it, push the button and just wait for the results. But yeah, you need to be as smooth as possible. That's why the Lycra, swim shorts, and stuff like that, and the cycling shorts, everything just skin-like. So no, it was good.
So yeah, it was a brilliant. It was looking back, it's funny, but at the time it was just not like, you're like getting in there and you're hoping that the readings are going to come out better. That's all you bothered about, really.
Well, I was saying, this is a bit of a poke at myself, but South Asian people with our hairy arms and legs, we're really in trouble. Then we gotta clean it off before we get in the bod pod. No, well, I did have a question around just, we're talking a lot about timing and appropriate fueling. What's your take, Chris, on indulging? Like, how strict do we need to be as an athlete, and when is it okay to have a cheat meal or have a dessert or an ice cream or whatever we like?
It's a great question. I think I, as a nutritionist, if I'm planning any team or any individual's meal plan for, say, a week period, I think the way I believe you should approach it, you've got to strike the balance right between what's technically correct, and there'll be times that you can't compromise on what's technically correct, for example, around performance or what have you, and then what's good for mood of the individual, mood of the team. And I think when you look at that, you've got to always be mindful of that. And then you have to, for me personally, you have to identify the times to put something more indulgent in the meal, because it's something to look forward to. It's a treat, and it keeps it interesting. And then the way I tend to structure those it's around where where the person would need more calories, because generally speaking, indulgent food has higher calories because there's maybe more fat, more sugar, more carbohydrate in it, for example. So it's maybe generally where there's a period of fatigue, a recovery day where the body actually needs the extra calories to recover. So it's being smart with where you where the opportunities are, and putting things in quite deliberately.
Got it.
I think it's important, but I think if you've got to be smart with it. You do need a level of discipline, though. I think that you can fall into the trap of having more than you potentially need, but it all comes down to what you're doing. I guess with what we said, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, it all comes down to your fuel requirements, essentially.
Right. And I think, like, how does what's your take on, athletes from different backgrounds and cultures, or even female athletes for that matter, around, menstrual cycles and so on, different cultures, different sorts of foods, different spices, different taste, textures. Does it, I guess, is it at the end of the day, a carb is a carb and a protein is a protein and you kind of use it, or how does it work?
Well, it is technically when you break it down to its basic the kind of biochemistry of it, but how it's prepared, how it's delivered, and how it's culturally consumed is totally different. So, if you're working with a team of 20 odd players, there's very, very, very diverse palette within that group. So, when you're catering for teams, you need to make sure that the menu is broad and balanced enough to cater for most things. You can't cater for everything, but cater for most things. Or if you work with individuals, it's the job of a nutritionist then to work with the taste and preference and the cultures of the individual. So how can you fuse what's technically right in with the habit and routines of the person? So I think that's something that you can't just say it's boiled chicken and rice every day because that's technically right. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Have you ever, I think I've heard a story on one of the podcasts on Sky, one of the football podcasts, where Roy Keane has said when he moved to one of the Italian clubs, he tried to eat like them, a bit more like salad-based Mediterranean, and then he just lost all this weight and just needed to get back to eating Irish potatoes, for example. And I just was wondering, even from a cultural perspective, I don't know if you've even thought or got any knowledge on it, but Danny, for example, is convinced that because he's got some Italian in him, that he can eat more pasta than anyone else and it doesn't affect him. So, culturally, is there something to that, like an Irishman needing potatoes and an Italian, for example, maybe needing more pasta, something like that? Do you think that's just tastes?
I don't know, so I was giving my opinion, if you like. I think what you brought up with, though, you do develop a palate and a cultural kind of preference for these things. So maybe it's a perception,
yeah,
essentially, that becomes a behavior. But I don't know if there's anything within the genetics.
Mm.
So
Interesting. And I mean, we've talked a lot about obviously macro, and we haven't talked as much about micronutrients. But I'd be curious first to hear your thought on maybe the importance for the average person listening to the podcast. How important is it to get the macro and the micro, or is one more important than the other? There's probably no right answer to that, but I'm going to throw it out anyways. Let's start with that one, actually.
well, listen, they're all essential in some way, shape, or form. So they all have to be present if you want to be healthy and nourish your body. You need a bit of everything, right? And then yes, carbohydrates for fuel, for cognitive function, recovery, protein for all areas of growth, hair, nails, muscle, a lot. But then actually for other areas around health, immunity, in recovery, we talk about maybe the gut microbiome, going in, getting a real diverse kind of spectrum of micronutrients from fruit. So I always say to anyone I work with, try and eat the rainbow. If you do that, you're going to be getting that diverse group of nutrients that absolutely essential for all sorts of reasons, whether you're an athlete or a non-athlete.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, and how would someone go about? What's your take for the average person who maybe doesn't have access to dexapods or hexa scans, dexapods, and so on and so forth? How should someone assess their respective needs?
Well, in terms of body composition,
Maybe not even body. Just I guess it would start with what is my output? What am I fueling for? As you said, but what tools are there? Specific tools you might use to measure nutrient needs, calories, carbs, etc.?
I think there's loads out there. Like Laura mentioned at the time, she was using MyFitnessPal. There's so many of them available out there now. For anything that's going to improve your awareness of what you're eating, I think it's a good thing. So if you can start to educate yourself with how much carbohydrates are in X, Y, and Z, and then it can help you understand what your daily calorie intake is, and you can start to then think about what you're eating and be a bit more mindful with it and have a bit more intent about each meal, then I think that's the most powerful thing. Because otherwise, ignorance is bliss. You don't know what you don't know, and you might think that you're consuming a balanced diet, but when you look at it, it might be 80% carbohydrate, and you may be over consuming because you're never actually using that fuel enough to burn it and use it, and that's where you might get excess weight gain, for example. So I think the first any tool that educates you to understand your calorie intake, I think is beneficial for sure.
I love that. Laura,
Sounds
I think
good.
you have
I
a
mean,
thought.
I'm interested. So when we were working together, you introduced me to, I guess the supplements of some sort. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but you definitely introduced me to beta alanine, um, creatine. I think maybe lysine as well. I know
Lucy.
the sorry,
Yeah,
leucine.
Lucy. Yeah.
Leucine. You also the vitamin D was huge. So maybe you could. I've also known quite a few squash players recently who the influence of vitamin D can also affect speed. Is that correct? So it's quite important as an indoor sport, but also kind of just an athlete in general to make sure that you're really up on vitamin D.
Well, all those things, I guess. I guess it may be in isolation, difficult to say, but and if yeah, vitamin D and muscular contraction and calcium and all those micronutrients are all associated with different areas of performance. I think my main angle at it is that where the huge body of evidence is, it's around immunity and bone health. That's my
Yeah.
main. Anything else on the back of that emerging evidence is interesting and nice to have, but like I said at the beginning, I look to what's kind of what's more known, what's solid, and what can you rely on. I think with the supplements, I've got always use a very narrow bandwidth of supplements. So what you mentioned there, beta alanine, creatine, leucine, they're very common, very well known, very well researched, and very fit for purpose for the what we were trying to achieve. And that's what we kind of
Do you think generally those are, particularly the beta alanine, was something I'd never come across? Do you think that that's a really good supplement for squash because of the kind of workload that you have to go through?
yeah, we use a lot of that. I think particularly when you're also doing your kind of muscle building phase, anything that's like high intensity exercise. It's called a muscle buffer basically, and you're performing lots of high intensity exercise, the body can produce a lot of like waste products during that period, like hydrogen ions, for example, and a high buildup of those hydrogen ions, they can actually impair your exercise performance. So, what intake of beta alanine does over a period of time, because if you remember, you had to load it with food over like a 2 to 4 week period. When you have beta alanine and you take a loading phase of that, that can help kind of clear away those kind of waste products, which can improve your exercise efficiency, kind of buffer your muscle. So yeah, and if you're performing and you're doing repeated bouts of activity, then it can help with the performance, recovery, and adaptation in those areas. And creatine's a similar thing. We talked earlier, if you're in the gym, anything high intensity or the energy system is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. You've got so much of that. And the reason why sometimes you kind of fatigue at 8 reps is because you've kind of run out of ATP. That takes time to regenerate. A period of creatine supplementation can actually kind of help you get more, can it help you regenerate ATP a bit more readily, so you can maybe get 10 quality reps out rather than 8, for example. So yeah, if you are performing those kind of high intensity actions on a regular basis, those things can help. But not everyone's a responder.
Right.
That's important for the research. Not everyone's a responder. So what I would like to do, I would say, what's the translational potential of a product to who I'm working with? If there's enough evidence to say, right, look at you, Laura, you're doing X, Y, and Z. Yeah, I think this product there's a high level of confidence this could work for you, and then you try it.
Have you come across beta alanine? I had.
I've heard of it. I haven't tried it. I have tried creatine before.
It's such a strange product because you basically take it in some sort of like granule, like sugar granule form, and you stir it into water and take it. Am I right, Chris? Like half before a session,
Yeah,
maybe half.
yeah, good way. Take it with food. So we split you take it with powder because it gets digested
Yeah.
easier. Um, But you take it with food for a couple of reasons. You have to take it over a split dose over like 3 to 4 meals, because actually it can help your skin can get quite tingly when you
Well, I
take.
don't know if I was doing that because my skin used to just go bonkers. And
May
I
not be. Well, I
maybe
advise you to
that's
take it
research.
with food. Yeah,
Maybe just take it and then you get all tingly on your face and your hands, and then you just go for it and see if you can push through
yeah,
some extra pain.
exactly. Some people tend to like that. I mean, it's quite popular in like pre-workout formulas and
Right.
like building world and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've got to get the doses right. That's important, and
Yeah.
take it with
So,
food.
so aside from maybe creatine and vitamin D, is there anything else that you would recommend, or even your opinion on some of the most recent kind of the athletic greens, and that I know spirulina was big, wasn't it? And all the greens back in the day. There's the new IM8 one. I'm not sure, like any of those that you think are worth taking, or are you just gonna pee it out effectively?
Yeah, I mean, I don't tend to use them a lot in my practice. To be honest, I mean, you use them quite a lot on a personal use, but I don't see there's you're not doing any harm with that.
Mm,
A lot of the research around that was looking at kind of like acidity and alkaline around your blood pH, which is not something I tend to work in. I've never needed to kind of influence that with any athletes I've worked with. But generally speaking, there's a lot of goodness that you're going to get through those products. So as long as you're not over consuming and consumed at the right times, I don't think there's a big deal with them. But the biggest thing around supplements, if anyone's taking supplements, particularly if you're an athlete, and I remember pushing you hard on this, it's making sure they're batch tested for banned substances. I remember asking you regularly, give me a list of your products, and I'll check all these online to make sure they've all batch tested. And if they're not, then we need to do something about it. So it's making sure that the product is the supplements out there, like cherry juice we used to use to help your recovery, to reduce
yeah.
muscle soreness. There's sleep products are quite popular now,
Yeah.
which can improve sleep quality with an individual, and there's clear recovery benefits to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's making sure what you're taking that if it generally sounds too good to be true, it generally is.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, what's your go-to sleep uh, product?
Quite simple, really. I mean, things like so like the reason we like to use cherry juice, there's two reasons for that. One, it can reduce muscle soreness from a recovery perspective, but also it's got naturally occurring melatonin in the particular cherry, the Montmorency cherry, the tart cherry, which can improve, kind of reduce the time it gets you to sleep, which there's a benefit for that. Melatonin is available on prescription, so you can't just go into a shop and buy it in the UK.
Mm.
So that's got a good body of evidence. Magnesium for that kind of relaxant kind of perspective. But there's lots of blends out there. I don't think there's any single one to say that this helps sleep. But I think if you have good sleep routines, I think it's more important to have good sleep routines and good temperature. Um, Even more things like how you're reducing screen time before you go to sleep.
Yeah.
Right.
Mindfulness can often be more beneficial than a supplement itself.
Hmm.
You've got to find a few things that work for you. I think it's so bespoke to the individual and everyone's house and lifestyle and where they are. Even your pillow can have a big impact on how you sleep. So
Yeah.
Right. Well, Laura mentioned a couple of these supplements like this IM8 and Athletic Greens and stuff, and I don't know. You can choose not to comment if you like. Do you think most of it is marketing hype, or do you think there's genuinely a lot of kind of validity in these sorts of products?
impossible for me to say without looking at the products.
Okay.
I'd have to have a good look and see, and look at the references, look how credible the references are, and I have a framework that again assesses the translational potential to the athlete I'm working with. Then I can give you an answer. But
Got it.
it'd be hard and unfair for me to say otherwise.
I've got a quick question. So I put a little question box on my Instagram yesterday for a few people to drop a question in, and one of the ones which I thought was quite interesting was any advice for teenagers who are trying to be good at sport, so maybe might not have access to quite the professional level that you would be at. Obviously, we've talked about the carbs and protein, and I remember Mark saying when we first no, I don't mean this to sound bad with Mark, but he was like, you don't really need to overthink your nutrition, Laura, da, da, da. And I'm like, no, we're in this to like make it to the top. And I think these 1% can really make a difference. And they really did. And like, credit to Mark, I felt like he got really on board, and I think in a way we like almost changed his mind on how we can really like work as a team with that. It was brilliant. But if you don't have that quite professional setup with a team, how would you say a teenager could manage that as they're growing? And you don't want to give them anything that's going to, I know you'll know more about this, but give them anything that's going to kind of be detrimental to them, but get the most out of it. Is it as simple as milk? What would you suggest?
I think first and foremost, it's making sure there's good routines and behaviors around food. That's the essential thing. And if I was working with young athletes, and I have done in the past, I have I call it food foundation second assessment, and it just assesses initially dietary routines. So how you have it, are you having 3 meals a day?
Yeah.
So let's forget about the composition of the meal, but are the 3 meals a day going in? Right, check.
Yeah.
And of that, you start to break it down. Okay, are you having fish twice a week? Are you having milk daily? Do you like milk? Then I have this like stack, and you're building the habits, and you're assessing the foundations of the diet, and then within that you get, and once you get past level one, if you like, where you've got your 3 meals a day, etc. Then it's okay. What type of, are you eating a blend of brown carbohydrates, if you like, so high fiber foods versus kind of starchy foods, and then that's where you start to look at it, and then without touching any kind of supplementation, you can start to build good habits. And then when you look at it a bit more, you might say, right, a recovery shake for someone who's under 16, who's going to the gym, it could be milk, it could be chocolate milkshake. That would help them. And you got to think about young people. That's their opportunity. They're in that period of maturation that they're in, or the hormonal changes of teenagers, male and female. That's got you've got to really find the right way to. And if they're an athlete, an aspiring athlete as well, so extra workload to the common person, then that has to be supported through calories.
Yeah.
And if there's a deficit, it's too over a period of time. And as you know, as a female, that's where things like REDS can happen, and issues around the menstrual cycle, for example. Or on the male side, you might not grow and adapt as well as you possibly can. So
Yeah.
I think it's the fundamental habits around fueling
Yeah.
would need to be in place. Then you just build around that with as many whole foods as you possibly can.
And just quickly adding on to that, talk to me about snacks, because the amount of times that I'm coaching a junior now on the other side of it, and I come off and there's either no, and I know you're going to say the main thing to do is prepare, but there's no preparation or little preparation, and it's grab what you can. The stuff that I see that goes in post session is kind of like, do you talk about it? Do you not? So what as a nutritionist would you be saying as a post training snack would be, if you haven't prepared, or even if you have prepared, but what would you say that they could eat that would be beneficial?
I think if you are prepared and diligent, something that's going to give you a decent hit of carbohydrate and protein. So you got to try and find what you like. So for someone it could even be a peanut butter bagel with some jam on it, like straight after. That's going to give you some good quality whole food, and that'll
Great.
get you into that could be your first phase. Where someone like you might have a first phase recovery shake and cherry juice or something.
Yeah.
That could be the first phase for someone, and then when they go home for every meal, that's the big feed that's relatively balanced. In the gym bag, if they just call it the petrol station on the way to training, if you just grab a chocolate milk and a banana, like something that's going to give you a decent little bit of carbohydrate. What you want to avoid is either eating nothing or going for something that's really just calorie dense and non-functional.
Mm.
You've got to try and get something that's going to give some kind of protein and carbohydrate in some kind of ratio. I mean, that's the important thing, because they work well together to kickstart the recovery process.
Great.
And yeah, and on kind of on this theme of the timing, almost food intake timing over the last several, I guess, years now. Intermittent fasting. I personally have been seeing way more about intermittent fasting, and then some people are talking about, completing aerobic exercise in a fasted state. Can you talk a little bit about this concept of nutrition timing? So, like we spoke about the snack right after eating to kickstart recovery, and could intermittent fasting be beneficial to maybe even develop certain things, whether it's fat loss or aerobic engine utilizing fat more as a fuel or anything like that?
think with stuff like intermittent fasting, if you look at the evidence, essentially it's there were different processes that were triggering when you exercise in a fasted state. Different things will happen in your body. But when you look at in terms of weight loss, what you'll find is that overall there's just a net less calorie intake. And if there's a period of intermittent fasting, there's just been less calories going in over time. So that's the biggest bang for buck. But when you talk about fasted exercise, for example, if you just get out and go for a run without putting any fuel in your body, then your body will, and if it's a relatively low intensity run, your body will primarily oxidize fat as its primary fuel source. And it's as simple as that. If you put carbohydrate in straight away and add an energy gel before you went for a run, then you start using that fuel and triggering kind of glycolysis. So yeah, they're all important. They're all things you can add in, and they're all things you can tweak and play around with if you've got a good solid training program and you've got a well managed nutrition schedule. I think stuff like that you can weave into your. I've never prescribed intermittent fasting, for example, but I think if you're looking to optimize a few small areas, providing everything else is on point, then I think it's got some value. But I think just going straight to there as a short, not necessarily be the right way of doing it. I think the way I like to do it is a very boring thing to say, an evidence based structured approach, because
Mhm.
I believe that's just the way to do it, and that's my preference as a practitioner.
Definitely sounds good. So one more question from the Instagram, might just weave these in. How much protein should we be eating a day?
Depends on what you're trying to achieve. So let's use you for an example. If you are going into a muscle building phase,
Yeah,
you're going to be breaking muscle down on a regular basis.
wouldn't mind doing that now. So let's go with that.
Well, I'd go like a 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. If you're looking for like muscle, and at 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram body weight, if you're then looking at muscle maintenance, just to kind of keep what you've got around about a gram per kilogram of body weight. And just for context, a chicken breast can be anywhere between 15 and 20 grams, a pint of milk, 15 grams protein. So it's important then to break that down over your meal times and have regular doses of protein over a day rather than just you can't just binge on a huge amount of protein. You're not going to benefit from it.
Definitely.
Interesting. And Chris, I don't know if you've heard of, I remember seeing some time ago this device called a Lumen metabolism tracker. Have you ever heard of that, or have you heard of other devices like this?
No, I'll not use them.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, this thing was, I found it interesting because it said that apparently you could breathe into the device, and then when you breathe into it, it'll tell you whether you're primarily oxidizing
Oh yeah, so
carbohydrates,
I've used them in the lab setting. Yeah, that's a classic physiological test, and he's looking at what you call the respiratory exchange ratio, and then that's basically assessing at what point you start switching from oxidizing fat to oxidize using carbohydrate.
etc.
They're generally. Did we ever do that with you on the treadmill? I'm not sure if we did, but you've
I,
done.
I
Yeah, you
yeah, I
put.
think we probably had the data from when I'd done fitness testing at the
Yeah,
EIS, maybe in the lead up. Yeah.
yeah. But they're classic. Always used in the lab
Right.
setting. I think what you see now there's more and more practical, more mobile versions being used. I don't use them in my particular practice at the moment.
I tell you what we did do. We did the sweat test, which was interesting. So
Oh.
that was basically patch stuck to my head, wasn't it? Kind of an absorbent patch. Here, I'm creating some brilliant images
Mhm.
today, and basically run on a treadmill and sweat, and then catch how. Basically, I think you remember you saying just going to see how salty your sweat is, and then that's a reflection in hydration. So maybe you could explain that, and then maybe also link into a little bit of hydration because squash is obviously a really tough sport, as we know, and you do sweat a lot. And I know we're not going to be able to measure people's sweat, but if you are a heavy sweater, how important getting more than just water is into the body.
Yeah, I think that's what we were trying to achieve. We're trying to look at there. It's like what's your sweat rate. Is how much sweat you lose, so how much mass of water you're losing. So that's relatively simple. You can do that yourself, just weighing yourself pre and post exercise. Um, Ideally, in I guess the same clothes, minimal clothes pre and post
Yeah.
to see. And your change in body weight is generally like a kilogram of weight. If you've lost a kilogram of weight, that's about a litre of sweat you've lost. So that's a very simple way of doing it. And then I guess the level that we went to was actually of that sweat, you've got a high sodium concentration or not. And then that can just determine the kind of the hydration strategy. So I can't remember the results actually on that, but if you had a high,
Average.
if you had a, yeah, if you had a, you just then your basic electrolytes kind
Yeah.
of effervescent tablet would be adequate. But say someone might have a lower sweat, higher sodium concentration, then you'd increase your electrolytes.
Yeah.
You just try and match it.
If you have that higher sodium concentrate, would that be someone who might cramp?
Potentially, I think there's many factors to cramp. I think people always look at
Okay.
electrolyte losses, but I if I'm working in sport and endurance sport, I always tend to look at carbohydrate. If there's
Right.
a lack
Okay.
of carbohydrate, first and foremost, that can be reason for cramp. If you're not used to the workload that being asked to do, that's probably more likely you're going to cramp. But then when you get down into the more nitty gritty of it and more micronutrients, things like maybe calcium, which can be lost in sweat as well, and things like that, may be associated with muscle contractions and cramp. There's multifactorial, I think, the reason for cramping.
Right. Okay.
Hmm. Very interesting. Yeah.
You got any more questions I had?
Good. Do you have anything on any more Instagram questions?
Well, there's a few, but we've covered quite a few. We had advice for teenagers, which we've asked, supplements for athletes, which we've discussed already, leaning up without losing power, which I feel like we've discussed, protein a day. If an athlete wants to lose weight but perform well, what do you suggest in terms of calories for fat, carbs, and protein? So I don't know if we've covered that one, but the last one I've got is any nutritional help that can prevent post-match stiffness, which I guess is just about recovery, I would assume, but anything extra?
I'm not sure about stiffness per se, but I think that's where the different recovery modalities complementary to nutrition become essential.
Yes.
So for me, after a bout of exercise, rehydrate, refuel. That's the important. That's where the body is metabolically active, and your time to cash in is then. So you get that done, and then you maybe think about depends what time of the day you finish your exercise, but then looking into that, there's various things like ice baths. Do you want cold water immersion? If you don't want to adapt, then get straight into the ice because going into ice can kind of inhibit your adaptation. If you do want to adapt, hold off the ice maybe till the next day.
Yeah.
And then to improve with stiffness, it's kind of like basic low level, yoga flow, foam rolling, low off feet kind of swimming, spin on the bike.
Yeah.
I think it's there that I would say they're the things that you'd look at. But then if you complement that with your nutrition and you're stacking fuel around that, and then we're looking at collagen and things like that, then there's all sorts of complementary things you can do.
Great.
That's fantastic. I mean, this has been very, very educational for me personally. You've answered a bunch of questions. There was one thing you said a few minutes ago about, I think you were talking about endurance sports, and you said that you would give them a lot of carbs. I remember when I was younger, I always had this misconception, I think, that if someone's going on this endurance sport, whether you're running a marathon or Tour de France or whatever, you're primarily using the aerobic system and you're oxidizing fat. And I guess that was one thing where I realized later that you're still needing a lot of carbs in that situation as well for fuel. So I don't know if people are listening, if you're thinking that you're primarily doing an aerobic sport with over a long enough period of time, or maybe at a high enough intensity, you still need multiple fuel sources. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, that's the evidence is there. If you're doing a marathon, for example, then if you've not got adequate carbohydrate, your performance will be significantly reduced. I think that can be challenged. So yeah, I think it's absolutely crucial. Your body will tap into different energy systems all the time whilst you're training, but over that long period of time, glycogen is you need that fuel in the tank. It's only going to get lower and lower. So start with that. Start with it fully fueled. Keep it topped up at regular intervals. And that helps kind of be helps kind of be that fuel guarantee.
Got it. And what's this trend? Sorry, Laura. One other thing popped into my mind around over the last 5 years or so. I've probably been hearing more and more about this thing of concept of ketosis and wanting to get into that state. What is that for people who don't know? And then for athletes, is it beneficial in any way? Can it cause any positive adaptations?
I think the ketogenic is that's when you're very in a very, very low carbohydrate diet,
Mhm.
high protein, high fat, and you go into that kind of using ketones, which there's a high energy yield from ketones. But if you look at the research in terms of performance, high intensity performance, and get significant performance, I don't think it's there. But I think it's very, very popular in the non-athletic world. But it's in my time working in elite sport, it's something I've never prescribed or focused too much attention on because it's not been complementary to performance for that reason, because the lack of carbohydrate, really.
Yeah.
And how's the take on kind of having a vegan diet when it comes to, is it, again, is it easy to still get adequate micronutrients and so on for an intense training regimen?
Well, I think it's probably getting better now because vegan choice and vegan foods are way more accessible than they used to be. And I've had vegan athletes before, and the biggest challenge for a vegan athlete will be around just amino acid profile you're getting from plant-based foods. I mean, the leucine, for example, is it's an amino acid. It's essential for muscle building. It kind of triggers what you call mTOR, metabolic pathway for making you build muscle. That's really high in lots of animal-based proteins. You can still get it in lower amounts in almonds and various other foods, but it's harder. You've got to try and eat more plant-based foods. You've got to try and combine different plant-based foods to get the amino acids that you get maybe from like an egg or different various meats. So it can absolutely be done. There's lots of very successful vegan athletes out there. But you're probably just going to have a bit more discipline around the details to make sure you're getting what you need.
I love it. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Amazing. Well, Chris, again, from my side, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. You've educated me for sure. We've painted some fun pictures of Laura with patches and sitting scrunched up in pods and so on and so forth. So this has been fantastic. Thank you.
No, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I enjoyed it. It was great to chat.
Beautiful. Have you ever felt stuck in your squash? Are you training hard, but you're not sure if you're working on the right things to actually get better under pressure?
That's exactly why I created a new online coaching community. Unlike other programs that give you just drills, we give you a framework so you know exactly what to work on, why it matters, and how to hold up in real matches.
Whether it's finally breaking through a plateau, structuring your solo practice, or joining us live each month for group coaching, this community is designed to take the guesswork out of improvement. If this resonates with you, please send me an email at ahad@arperformance.com. I will personally help you see if it's the right fit. Thanks for listening to Between the Lines, where world-class insight fuels the squash journey that never ends. If today's episode helped you grow, please share it with someone in your squash circle and join our community online. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and stay in the rally.